So let me introduce our speakers today. We have two great folks. Mike Brown, who's an experienced finance exec currently at an early stage company, a spin-off from DreamWorks, but previously VP of Finance at Mixpanel, as well as at Burst, Limelight Networks, and SuccessFactors. In addition, we have Phil Kasuba, an experienced VP of Sales, currently at Obero Solutions, and previously with DTMI Spatial, Sun Microsystems, and Broadvision. And we're excited to be able to talk today and learn from their experience on sales structures, SaaS sales structures, as well as issues with managing a growing sales organization. If we assume that we're now in the third or fourth generation of SaaS, how have sales structures evolved to better serve customers in the SaaS sales model? What's worked and what hasn't worked? So I'm going to be asking our two panelists, if you will, some questions. And I'd love to have people chime in. You can use the chat button, which I think you've all become familiar with now with the, with the audio problems. Jump in, ask any questions in addition. But we're going to start off talking about experiences that Mike and Phil have had and what they've seen work and not work in terms of SaaS sales structures, and particularly focusing on the issue of how do you separate the sales organization between hunters and farmers, or to best support the acquisition of new customers versus the acquisition or the retention and growth among existing customers. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Mike and ask you some questions. What's your perspective on what do you see in terms of whether companies should immediately separate between hunters and farmers, or do you think that that's something that evolves as a company grows? And Mike, can I hear you?
There we go. Yeah, I think that one of the challenges that I've experienced is I've never actually seen anyone who is really top-notch at both hunting and farming, except for one person. And having been in business for a while, that left an impression that there are unique skills between hunters and farmers, and that I think at any point where you've got a land and expand, or you've got upsell potential down the road, that you should look hard at where do you draw that line, and how do you pass things over from hunters to farmers. As for when in the business cycle to go there, you know, I think if it's very, very early stage, it's no need to make things more complicated than they need to be, and just let folks be multi-hatted and play roles. And but just be aware of the fact that, you know, there's a reason why hunters and farmers exist, and look for reasons when your system is getting strained. For example, a sales rep is spending all of their time farming on driving upsell and not driving new logos. And that's a good point to start, you know, thinking about how do you split the team out and add different components.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I think particularly the point that there are very few people who can do both well. Phil, coming at it from your perspective of managing a sales organization, what do you see in the issues in terms of trying to manage hunters and farmers, and at what point do you separate them out?
Hi, Lauren. First of all, thanks for having me a part of this conversation. I think it's one that every company is going through right now as they migrate towards services and subscription economy business models. If it's okay for you, I'll try to answer it both ways. One, what my experience has been, but also talk a little bit about what we're seeing with some of our clients. That might give a bit of a broader perspective, just based on the type of work. So from my personal experience, I think it really gets down to having a clear understanding of what your go-to-market strategy is and what is the best possible way to engage with those customers. And as we know in the SaaS world, it's not just about acquiring the customer the first time, it's about how you retain them going into the second, third year of your relationship with them. And then, of course, even go beyond that and try and monetize that. And so I think you want to look at your sales team and align them to the way that your go-to-market strategy is set out. And I know that from the work we're doing with other software companies, specifically SaaS companies, that's exactly what they're doing. They'll go through that early phase of acquiring lots of logos and getting the initial customer. And then they'll start to move to, how do I make sure I retain those customers so that I can start financially benefiting from that relationship? Because typically our cost of acquiring a customer, exceeds a 1-year period when you start to look at the metrics. So we generally see that where clients are really trying to figure out how to measure that and manage that very tightly.
And then, do you see one of the things that we've been measuring is, would you see, and it'd be interesting to hear both your you start separating hunters and farmers. For example, can the hunters hang on to their accounts for a certain length of time, or do you immediately hand them over to the farmers? And does that depend on the type of business that you're doing, whether it's more transactional versus large accounts? And you mentioned land and expand. Well, who's best to do the landing? And the new account acquisition comes from the new account reps, but then the expansion, can those reps still continue to do the expansion?
Yeah, Lauren, why don't I take a first cut from a sales perspective? So a couple thoughts. One is, I think you have to look at your product and service and understand what that initial relationship is with the customer. If you've gone in with a try and buy methodology, or you've gone a low entry point and you recognize that you have to get the customer using the technology and really benefiting from it to make sure that that contract's secure, you may want to leave it with the existing sales team and make sure that their compensation is aligned that way, so that you're getting the conversion into a true customer versus just a try and buy kind of client. If your service or product is broader, and let's say the customer is making a much bigger commitment to your organization, then I think, as Mike was saying, it's hard to find a hunter and farmer in one person. So you might start to look at migrating towards that account management role, or even customer success role, to help them be successful and continue to grow the relationship from there.
Yeah, I agree with Rob. I think a fair amount of it also depends on the complexity of the follow-on sales. So your point, is it transactional or is it a whole new contract, et cetera? I think that has a big factor. And Philip, have you ever had more of a team-based rather than a handoff? Because one of the things that I've seen when you go to a hunter-farmer model, just one more handoff with a customer experience. And I was wondering if there's a way to mitigate that.
Yeah, you're right. I think you definitely don't want the customer to feel like they've been passed from, one person to another. What we've done is we've decided to make an investment in what we're calling customer success. And I think a lot of SaaS companies are doing the same thing, where you want to be able to measure how your customer is actually benefiting from your product. And sales isn't usually the easiest or fastest way to do that. And so by having some type of customer success view on, is the product being used? Is the customer enabled properly to use the product? Those things seem to really resonate well with clients, because at the end of the day, they want to pay for a service that they're getting value from, right across the board.
Yeah, this is really the crux of the issue, is how do you organize and manage that really account-based selling? And how do you fit, we get loads of questions about customer success, and is customer success a sales function, or is it some other function that's not really sales? And from an accounting perspective, it seems to come down, and Mike, you could probably speak to this better than I can. It seems to come down to whether customer success has revenue targets as compared to whether it's really just about enabling customers and encouraging adoption. But from a handoff, since we were talking about how the account-based selling and making the customer not feel like they're being handed off from one group to the next, how do you see that working best if you now have gotten big enough and you have a customer success, plus you have hunters, plus you have farmers who are expanding and renewing customers? How does it all fit together?
Sorry, I have a little
Mike?
lag to come off mute. That's really the big question that's going on at a lot of SaaS companies right now. And I think it's really a choice. Do you want your success team to be driven by revenue and incremental sales or dollar on dollar, versus do you want them to be more customer sat and adoption driven, which will lead to those financial benefits? And I think the pendulum's sort of swinging. A lot of folks didn't want customer success hitting up the customer, with sort of a, would you like fries with that type approach initially. And that's what I saw a few years ago. But increasingly, people are saying that the number one measure of customer success is more revenue. And so, if they've got upsell targets, that puts them more in the sales and marketing part of the P&L. And if they're just there to drive adoption and ensure customers are satisfied and stay around and support the subscription line, then they would end up in cost of goods sold.
Yeah, and you said something really important there. You said that it sounded to me like you were saying the number one KPI or the number one measure of customer success is more revenue, whereas I think you're exactly right. A couple of years ago, people would have said the number one KPI would be, customers, however you measure customer satisfaction, or some metric around usage of the product as compared to revenue. Do you see the same thing, Phil?
Yeah, it's for sure customer success is all about retaining and growing the customer, right? And I think there's kind of a leading and lagging indicator here. The leading one is that the product is being, or the service is being well used and the customer is enabled and they're truly getting benefit from that. The lagging indicator is that our retention rate is 100%, or we've been able to continually monetize that customer relationship. And for me, and we're seeing this with more and more customers, the organization wants the visibility on that stuff, not just sales, not just technical support, not just the Office of Finance, but everyone in the organization wants to have the right visibility, those type of metrics to really drive the overall performance of the company, right? Because it's such an important bet we're all making as we're building our SaaS businesses, is that these customers will stay with us and we'll be able to grow them in a meaningful way that's going to help the top line, the bottom line, whatever those goals look like.
Exactly. No, I think those are all issues.
Most organizations are struggling with, how do I connect customer success with the financial and also the customer impact? And we're finding more and more that it's not just about measuring the retention rate, but it's also being able to log right in or tie into your own application, your own business systems, to really understand how your customers are using it. and including that as some type of measurement. Clearly, it's not easy. I mean, there's a lot of heavy lifting that has to happen, but when you get it right, it's really valuable for the company, right? And like knowing that that customer is truly using the core features of your service and benefiting from it, really allows you to establish, how secure that long-term revenue is, but also the potential of that customer doing references or being a spokesperson on your behalf. And so I think as we're getting more sophisticated, we're realizing there's so many things you want to measure to ensure success.
Exactly. Mike, did you have a follow-up on that, or?
Yeah, that 360-degree view of the customer, all those metrics, usage metrics are phenomenal. Knowing where your customer's getting into trouble, the tickets, are they paying on time? Have they been references? Trended customer success or CSAT scores or net promoter scores through surveys. All of those create such a robust and valuable picture of what's going right and what's going wrong with your customer base. Yeah, that's the holy grail.
Yeah, absolutely. So that brings us into looking at, so how do you manage this, and how do you actually implement these kind of behaviors on the part of your sales organization to get them to sell what you want them to sell, as well as focus on the customer and keep the customer happy? I'd love to hear from you both from different perspectives, what you've seen work and not work around sales compensation, as well as sort of territory management, handing off sales from one part of the sales process to the next when you think about the whole customer life cycle. Let me start with you, Mike, and just ask you, now that we're in the second or third generation of SaaS sales compensation plans, what are some things that you've seen that really didn't work in the past?
That did not work. Well, one of the things that I've seen is a challenge is when the customer success team has a revenue number, the coordination between them and sales, I've been in situations where we struggle to get that right. And probably it was related to the comp plan. But at the end of the day, we ended up with sales and customer success feeling competitive to each other versus partnering and creating the right conditions for account growth together, because they both bring great skills to the table on making that happen. But sometimes because they're in different departments, we just didn't get the SLA right. And I think that gets to also this idea of turnover, which you were alluding to before. A lot of that's really dependent upon the sales cycle and the nature of the individuals. But some person I've come to, I've been very comfortable with, a double pay scenario in order to support folks working across departmental boundaries. Don't want to double, if you can avoid it, don't do anything more than double pay. I've seen worse. And make it time bound and make it sense. So in order to encourage a transition from one rep to another, the first rep gets to hold it out and they get a last shot, maybe a quarter, then another quarter of 50-50 where they're encouraged to play along well, and then then the other rep picks it up. That's pretty generous. I've also seen ones that were a little bit more, tighter and bound just to encourage the new rep to pick it up. But I think, when you want to see these outcomes, you really got to think about the SLAs between groups and are the comp plans aligned. And when you definitely know it when it's not working.
Yep. No, I think that's good. You know, in the survey that we're currently conducting on sales structures and sales ops, where companies have separate new account versus renewal reps, we didn't get as in depth on customer success, but what we did see is about 58% of reps where they're separated, the new account reps can continue to sell for some defined period, like 6 months or 12 months, to the account so that they can upsell. And of those, about a quarter of the companies give full quota credit to both sides. And then the other 75% are some variation of, less than 100% quota credit. Phil, what have you seen in terms of that relationship between, there's really the three parties. There's the existing account reps, there's the new account reps, and then there's customer success if that's a completely different organization. How have you seen compensation, both at your company and also the companies you work with, how they're managing that?
Yeah, I think Mike's bang on with that, the comment he made about, one, how you measure them, but also the SLA between the teams. There's one thing I think we've all seen in the SaaS world is the metrics and how we manage the business is completely different than the way we used to do it with traditional, on-site ship and deliver products. And so one of the things that we're seeing, we do, and we see with our clients is, how do you create the visibility on the key metrics throughout the entire organization? So that a salesperson understands what's going on with customer success, a customer success person understands what's going on with an account manager team or others. And so, I think it's just really so important to having a healthy business. Specifically, we've chosen, and we see it with lots of our clients, that there's a true hunter that's going out to get the new customer and bring them on board to the platform. And, that setting them up to be successful and being able to see what work they're doing and how they're doing that is really valuable. And then what we've chosen to do is we've introduced an account management role where we're asking that person to take responsibility for growing those customers. Not just retain them, not just get the 100% renewal, but also get the 15 or 20% growth opportunity that we think is realistic in our business. And we probably put more emphasis on that on the compensation side, because we think the two are tied together naturally, right? If the customer is buying more, there's a pretty strong likelihood that the initial business is quite secure. And so we've tried to build that into our business model, and when we see that with our customers right across the board. I think the other thing Mike said that was really very relevant is, how do you line up those comp dollars appropriately? Make sure that they're truly feeling the impact of their efforts, right? Because with retention, it gets so confusing so quickly that you want to make sure that that compensation plan and what they see in their reports every day or every month really aligns properly.
Yep. No, and I think, like anything, it's the devil's in the details. Comp plans are really what drives the salesperson and drives the behaviors, and it's incredibly hard to get it right. Another question that comes
too.
Sorry.
Like, one of the things that we've seen is organizations that are transitioning from legacy models into a SaaS model, and they're trying to take those old comp plans and somehow make them work. And it's almost more dangerous, right? It kind of drives the wrong behavior and the wrong results. And you really do need to have that flexibility to make that adjustment and change as you go. I'm not sure what Mike has seen from his perspective, but I've just seen it a few times where the comp plan doesn't line up to what the business needs and doesn't get the results that people are expecting.
Mike, did you have any comments on that?
I think, simple is the key, because the comp plans need to be communicated to a bunch of different audiences. all of whom need to be aligned in some way and motivated for a similar set of objectives. So yeah, I don't have any experience trying to tailor like a perpetual license comp plan into a SaaS comp plan because I kind of grew up in the SaaS world. But I think one thing is if the payout table, et cetera, is really complicated, you've probably screwed it up. As for the text part, the comp plan document, I've been in several groups where we tried to get it below 8 or 9 pages, but at the end of the day, that's where it ends up being because of a lot of good reasons, lessons learned, et cetera. But yeah, overcomplicating comp plans is really an easy trap to fall into, and you just end up diluting what you're actually trying to motivate and making it that much harder for everybody to understand. Wait a minute, at the end of the day, sales wants to know, what do I have to do and how much of my money am I going to make? And if I do those things, and you got to make it super easy for everybody to figure that out.
Yeah, and Lauren, I'll put a little plug in for what we do, but creating that visibility on a day in and day out basis. And a simple thing in a comp plan in the SaaS world is to motivate your sales teams to sign multi-year agreements with your customers. If they can't figure out what that means in their comp statement and therefore their commission check really easily, you probably lost a huge opportunity to motivate and drive behavior. And so whatever opportunity you have to create that visibility and make sure the metrics are in front of people and it easily translates to a commission check is going to make it so much easier for the salespeople to believe in the comp plan and get the max out of it.
Great. It brings up one of the questions we've gotten asked about a lot, or there's been a lot of discussion, especially in the past, on selling more than 12 months, for example. If you sell more than a 12-month contract, you get paid the full commission on the 12, 24, 48 months that you've sold, even if the customer only pays for 12 months up front. What have you seen around that? Phil, have you dealt with that?
It does take a second to take it off mute. We do definitely, and generally we see that the comp plan has some type of accelerator rate, but it doesn't always match the new term of the contract unless the customer is paying upfront for the full term. So if they're signing a 3-year agreement and they're willing to pay for 3 years up front, then the salesperson would get compensated accordingly. But if it's a case of it's a 3-year agreement and they're signing, they're willing to pay for 1 year at a time, then generally we see some type of an accelerator on that to acknowledge the fact that that contract is quite secure and there's less risk that that customer may disappear in the future and therefore pay the salesperson more money to make that happen. I don't know, Mike, is that what you guys have done in your experience?
Yeah, I mean, there's such a broad range, Philip. Have done that, have also had, have had accelerators to drive multi-year behaviors, have also baked backlog, had a backlog quota as well as a new quota. And I think, reps and what we're doing now at Nova, I mean, we have one rep, so it's a pretty good conversation. But the idea is that, yeah, we'll pay him for years 2 and 3, but when they pay us. So there's a whole range there, and it basically boils down to, in my mind, how assured is that renewal? And I think increasingly in SaaS, they're not assured, even in multi-year contracts. And then the other thing is, well, how much should you pay the sales rep for the future year renewals when at the same time you have to pay a team of, either account managers or customer success reps, et cetera, to secure that renewal as well. So it's a blend of, driving the right behavior with sufficient incentives for the sales rep to get the longer sale, because I do believe longer deals mean more commitment. They'll stick around more. At the same time, not taking all the money off the table so that you can afford to service that account over time.
Yeah, and that brings up, actually we have a question from one of the participants on what kind of commission rate you pay on renewals versus new sales. Do you have a different rate and typically a lower rate for the renewal? But does that mean that if the new account rep sells all 3 years in the first contract, you're going to pay them the regular commission for a new account for all 3 years? And then what's your standard policy as a company for what you pay your renewal account managers versus what you pay for new accounts? Mike, do you want to take that from your previous experience? And then Phil, I'd love to hear what you've seen.
Sure. I've never been at a company that's paid the same rate for new versus renewal. And I think the ratio that Steve's got, sort of a 1 to 5 ratio, that's fits my experience. So there's always some discount for the fact that it's in the future and it's cash today. And then with respect to renewals reps, with one small exception, which I'll mention later, that it's always been more of a basket rather than an individual commission. So the plan that I think worked the best was a dollar-on-dollar renewal rate for the CSM's team of deals that were coming up for renewal. So it gave them more of a basket so they could choose where to spend their time rather than a direct commission. The only exception to that was we tried at Success Factors to roll out this concept of renewal save. Those really key renewals where they've already dropped a letter to you, we intend to get out, and the team rallies and decides to win the customer back, and it's all hands on deck and the sales rep gets involved. When they were renewal saves, we had a rate for that was much closer to the new. Those were really rare. But we had to have that sort of outlet for, this is not a normal renewal. It's very important to us. We need to pay people directly for making it happen.
Yeah, and
interesting. And Phil, what have you?
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to say, for mine, I see the same thing that Mike was talking about as far as there's definitely a different rate that would be paid for the renewal. I think one of the things some companies have done is combined add-on business with the renewals and reported that as retention. And I think from a comp, like a salesperson's comp plan, you probably want that add-on business to be at a similar rate to what the new business is. Because I think that's where you want your account manager or the person responsible for renewals to focus on. And so by driving a higher percentage there, you'll get some extra energy, and I think you'll see the results of that.
Right. One thing, typically, I agree. We paid the same for new and upsell. It just depends. If it's an account manager doing the upsell, then it's a direct commission. If it's the renewals team, it's more of it adds into their number, the dollar number.
Right. The one thing also, Lauren, we're seeing with more and more of our customers, especially some of the larger ones, what they recognize is they want to be able to model this stuff all the time, right? They want to look at the flow of renewals coming through. They want to see how each of those customers are growing. And then they want to model the comp plan, right? And model the different metrics in the comp plan so that they can make an educated decision based on, the metrics and the facts that they already have in their system. And that's probably one of about the conversations we'd have with someone like Mike, a CFO, or someone who's responsible for, that type of of driving that inside the company, you know, being able to have 3 or 4 models to look at and making sure they understand what the impact is really becoming top of mind with the executives, right? That they really are trying to make sure they have the visibility and they're making the right choices, because it changes, right? Like the model changes based on how your customer retention's going, or any of those factors. And so just being able to build that out and do that very quickly to look at different options, I think is really where some of the leading organizations are going.
Yeah, I mean, listening to you both and what we're seeing in the survey is that there's no one set model that, you know, no one size fits all. I think it depends. We're breaking out some of the data by both, you know, really you have within SaaS, you have sort of the low-end transactional. When I say low-end, I mean low-priced products, transactional model. And so the way you structure things in sales for that kind of product versus the higher-end, larger enterprise sale with much more of a land and expand model, and then, you know, at the highest level, a very big enterprise account, which requires a whole team and much more complexity around the compensation and incentivizing to get the whole team to work together. So it's interesting to hear from both your perspectives what you've seen work and not work. The other area that is, you know, I think along with customer success, another area that's gotten a lot more focus, or is starting to get more focus in the sales areas. There's always been sort of traditional sales training, but I think there's many more products out there, many more ways of incenting sales organizations to perform better. And it's not just about the compensation plan, and it's not just about the initial product training and sort of how to sell, but also in terms of sales competitions, sales gamification, you know, companies where all throughout the company you see sort of television screens with all the salespeople listed and how close they are to their target or their quota. You know, it's almost like all the sales team has to carry a banner, you know, saying I'm at 96% or I'm at 120%. I'd be interested. It seems like that's caught on much more in the SaaS world than it ever did before. And maybe it's just a matter of the way the world is changing. But Mike, I'd be interested in what you've seen work. And also, from a finance perspective, what kind of assumptions do you make about what you should invest in sales training, both in getting people up to speed and then on an ongoing basis? What kind of things have you seen?
Well, I tend to think of sales, I think of the squad. So you've got a quota-carrying sales rep. They've got a certain management ratio, you know, 1 to 6, 1 to 8, depending on their level. And then you can go up, you know, level 2, and level 1 managers up above. Same thing, those folks need solutions consultants or solutions engineers. And I've seen ratios of 3 to 1, 3 reps sharing 1 solution engineer. Down at the really low end of the business, you know, 1 solution engineer could cover 6, and at the super high end, a 1-to-1 relationship. Then you've got, you know, training. And I think a lot of people tend to cut training short. It depends a fair amount on the strength of your product marketing department. But the power of having someone focused on how the reps are messaging, how they're using their tools, are they being efficient, and making them as impactful as possible. And as you learn about the product market fit, helping to hone that in on you know, with collateral, et cetera. I'm just a huge fan of sales training. And I read something I thought was pretty smart. recently in tough times, a lot of people cut the sales staff and keep the quota carrying reps. And maybe the approach should be cut the reps back to the level that can be productive, but keep all the associated staff in order to drive that efficiency. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of sales training. I've seen it take companies that were selling from the SMB space with 40K deals to small companies you've never heard of, to mid six-figure deals to brand name companies, and I think a lot of that was the partnership between product marketing and sales enablement.
Yep. And by focusing on product management and product marketing, just to follow up on that, in a sense, you're really focusing on training in your specific product as compared to training in the sales process and or competition among salespeople to motivate them. Is that correct?
It depends on the level of experience.
Mike? I think we're having trouble going back and forth between muting and not muting.
Can you hear me now?
Let's see what, Phil, do you have comments on the sales training?
Yeah, to echo what Mike was just saying, I think it's becoming critical that, whatever your product or services are, you've got a target market, you've got a buyer that you're trying to understand and make sure that your sales team understands. And training, I think the way we used to think of it 10 years ago is completely different. We try hard to do a training type event every single week with our sales team because there's so much to cover. And ideally, we want to have our sales professionals in a position where they can consultatively help our clients understand what's the latest and greatest in sales performance management for SaaS companies. And so it means they need to know different buyers and understand the challenges they're facing. I'll give you a simple example. Like right now, we're all going through a change on regulatory requirements for financial reporting, and expenses is a part of that. And we want our sales team to be confident to have a conversation with the CFO about how we help with that. We know we're not the whole answer, but we can certainly make their lives a lot easier. And that's not an easy thing to get a salesperson comfortable with, in a single sales training session. And so we've just decided this is an ongoing, continuous build process to get the sales competency to match what the buyer, is expecting.
Right, and whether the content is product related, market related, et cetera, it's going to be all of the above, the mix depending upon your business. But I'd like to just echo what Philip said. The best I've seen, and I've been fortunate to see it a couple times now, is weekly sales training with sort of a rotating curriculum. And you still do have sort of sales kickoffs, et cetera, which are exciting and focused. But it's just the continual access and also thinking of sales enablement not as the person who has to make all the content, rather they're sort of the driver of the curriculum, and that leveraging reps, these experienced reps, to train the junior reps is super cost effective, and also that's what they want. They want to be like the successful rep. So having a healthy attitude towards helping your reps be successful, it's all part of a great selling culture. So and I've seen the scoreboards, I've seen stack ranking. I unfortunately at one point had to put everyone's stack rank on their name card when the new head of sales showed up. So I've seen the whole spectrum. It's kind of whatever fits your culture. But it's not train them once and leave them alone. I haven't seen that work.
And
yeah,
Lauren,
I think that's a great
comment. Sorry, to your comment before,
I was going
Lauren.
to say, train them once, leave them alone is not a model.
Sorry, Lauren, to your comment before,
Sorry.
how close your sales enablement or sales team is to the product marketing, to your chief product officer really helps with that, right? That, you know, our chief product officer is actively involved in our training and comes in with things like, you know, how do you read a customer's compensation plan to understand where their challenges are going to be in implementation, or how do you look at a territory optimization model and understand how you can lead the conversation with the customer. And that's just experience that he has inside and out that we're just hoping the sales team can, you know, get their hands on little bits of it to help their conversations with their clients.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think I did want to ask a few questions also about sales ops and how you see that changing in the SaaS world. One of the things that we see more frequently is that sales ops is sitting in finance as compared to sitting in sales, or even if it's still technically sitting under the sales organization, sometimes you have finance staff who are sort of horizontally tied to sales ops, or you know, just much more involved because of the whole complexity and requirement for in a SaaS company for finance to be on top of all the numbers and all the systems. I'd be interested, Mike, have you seen sales ops sitting in finance, and what do you think is the best way to organize it, or does it just depend on the situation of the company?
There's such a broad range of ways to organize it, and you know, a lot of folks when it comes to data management think that skill set best resides in a finance organization, and you know, oh, there's systems involved, so that should be in some sort of operations group. I think you see operations groups sometimes roll up to IT, sometimes roll up to finance, and sometimes roll up to the department. And so there's such a broad range, and I think the considerations are, you know, where are the real pain points in the business that need to be solved through coordination of systems and processes? Who best is situated to solve those problems? And then also, you know, how do the execs want to run it? I've had sales leaders who just want us to work for them, and I've also had sales leaders who, you know how to make it work for them and like to run that. And again, it kind of goes to that concept of an SLA. If sales is doing a great job on sales ops is doing a great job running their systems and their processes, and the forecast is working well and the incentives are all lined up, that's awesome. Let them keep going. So you got to find the right place based on that mix of factors. There's a couple of things that do drive you towards centralizing or at least shifting. I think sales comp, I think there's someone listening on board who really wanted me to take sales comp away from sales operations and move it over to me. And I never got around to it, so I'm sorry. But that is one of the ones that typically at some point compensation comes outside of sales ops just for the pure fact of, or at least administering the comp plan comes out just for the, you know, separating roles and responsibilities on that. But so, you know, and I think when you look at dashboards, I think there's a natural end between sort of company-wide financial and operating dashboards that then at some level down become department dashboards. And I think you need skill sets in some of the major departments, in particular sales, to run their own dashboards and that sort of thing. Forecasting, what I think works best is finance having their own opinion based on historical performance, and you balance that with sales leadership's management judgment and forecasting process. So you've got two opinions going in on what the forecast is. win-loss is a bear. I think that's best run out of a product marketing organization. But when you're small, you're really multi-hatted, and these things can live anywhere based on interest and ability. And as you go up the curve, some of these things find a natural home. And then sales training on CRM, sales comp, again, depends on sort of who runs it, but there's nothing better than training sales on how best to use these things and what they mean. So I typically leverage sales management quite a lot on some of those training operations.
Great. Phil, what do you see?
Let me talk to from the clients that we work with, and Mike talked about it. It really depends on the size of organization and what you're doing. But I think the key thing that's happening is trying to get all that data and all that information into some meaningful, useful platform or tool where all the groups can have access to the right information, right? Because no one builds a sales compensation plan in a vacuum, right? Like you do it based on the sales team that you believe you need to have for your go-to-market strategy, the market opportunity, what you can afford, how you want to motivate them. And those are all factors that if you could pull that together. Some of our clients, they start right from market opportunity and say, we think there's 500,000 customers we could sell our services to in the North American market, and I'm going to make sure that I've got my territories lined up well, and I have my salespeople lined up to those territories properly, and I've got my go-to-market strategy and my compensation. Like Mike talked earlier about that squad of sales where you've got a manager and an SE and other people contributing. Like there's a lot of moving metrics that you want to be able to model and play with and figure out what's the right model for you and your business for where you're at. And so I think anything you can do to help finance and sales operations and sales work more collaboratively on that conversation and use the right facts, because I'm sure you guys have seen it too. You come into meetings and everyone's got their own version of the facts. It's kind of a debate of fantasies at times. But just get them the right facts so they can start driving really meaningful decisions. And I think honestly, that's what sales ops was hoping to do when the function started in the company, is to be that strategic part of the organization that can pause and look at things differently with that mindset. And without the right platform and tools, it's hard to do.
Yeah, it's definitely sales ops is really the analytical sort of tool in between, or analytical group in between sales and finance, and goes much further, I think, today beyond what it traditionally was doing, with doing, cohort analysis and churn cohort analysis and a lot more deeper dives into the CRM system and looking at optimal sales or optimal profiles of customers, and there's just so much that can be done there. But we're running up against the top of the hour,
hey, Lauren,
and I know I do apologize.
Sorry, I was going to offer. It's Phil, actually. I was going to offer one other thing, which Mike talked before about, like sales incentives or doing spiffs and stack ranking or gamification. There's every time we do those types of things, you really want to have someone to model it and say, if I put that incentive out there, am I really going to accomplish what I'm hoping to, or does it become money that I'm going to burn? And the flip side is, if I put it out there, is it really going to motivate the sales team? Like, is there going to be a group of people on my sales team that are going to look at the spiff and just think it's a joke because they have no hope of getting there? And so, go back to that modeling and trying to create that visibility. I think it's a wonderful opportunity for sales operations and sales and finance to work collaboratively together to make sure that those decisions are driven properly.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and it doesn't take a huge amount of data to get some good analysis, but it's a lot better than 20 or 30 years ago when you just would sit there and sort of try and come up with good structures and throw them out there and see if they worked, whereas now you can use some data to keep refining and improving on your structures. But with that, I'm going to try and wrap so that we can let people. But we will have a recording. Hopefully it's come through. Again, I apologize for the audio. I do want to mention, obviously I have to put a plug in for OPEXEngine for anyone who's on the line who is not a member of the OPEXEngine benchmarking community. It's an annual benchmarking, which includes meetings and research and analysis, as well as our basic benchmarking platform with a very large number of financial and operating benchmarks covering all parts of the typical software or SaaS company. We are currently, as part of the benchmarking, we also do quarterly deep dives, and part of the reason we're doing this webinar today is because we've been doing a deep dive into sales structures and sales ops. We've decided to extend the sales ops survey. I'm getting a couple of questions on the chat side about when we'll see the results of that. We have promised to put out the results before the end of March, but we should have results much sooner than that. We have some interesting results already, but then because of the way our membership works for companies that are members, we can break it out by different business models and get a much more fine-grained presentation of the data. But if anyone has any other questions or comments, feel free to email me or OPEXEngine. And with that, I thank you all for your attention. I thank our great speakers today, Mike and Phil, and look forward to a great finish of Q1 for everybody who's on the sales side and focused on quarterly results. Thanks very much. Take care. Bye.